Why is it that Gauteng is the largest province in South Africa in terms of population? Why? Which is a small piece of land. It is because most of us as black people have actually left our provinces. I come from Mpumalanga, right? You come from the west. Where do you come from? The Free State, right? Why did we leave all of those places where there is land and come here? And now we have overpopulated this small piece of population. It's because this gentleman does not want land where he comes from. He wants something else. That's why he's sitting here.
Guys, so remember this video I made with Abumbeki when he actually said in quotes that the land doesn't belong to our people. Take a listen.
If you come to me to say, now let's still do something about the land, I'd say bear in mind what we've said in that Freedom Charter for many decades. The land shall be shared among those who work it. That is a very well thought out position, strategic position with regard to solving a number of issues here. The national question, the land question. No, somebody pops up. No. Let's take the land and give it to our people. So I say, I belong to the ANC. Who, according to the ANC in South Africa, is not our people? There's nobody who's got our people. Land shall be shared among those who work it, black and white and whoever they are.
That whole argument has come back full circle in light of the upcoming EFF's MPA conference with Prince Mashele, as he actually smashed one of the major foundational non-compromisable pillars of the EFF as regards land reform in South Africa. So I found this post by Prince Mashele on Facebook that actually seemed to blow Facebook with multiple comments, especially coming from black people, especially comments like this that actually said, these blacks in this instance do not have a plan or do not need the land, or this other argument by another black person who actually said that we call him whatever we want, but the truth of the matter is that we do not need land, we want a better life. Or even this other comment that actually said, indeed, Prince, people just want land, not knowing what they're going to do with it. Some of them don't even have land, but they want land. So it's actually really interesting that Prince Mashele then actually made these really interesting comments that many blacks in the crowd, I think, didn't really get provoked or kind of like resist the arguments regarding the fact that many black people in South Africa, according to Prince Mashele, do not need land, but what they need is a kind of like better life and better living. And so it boils down to the question, and actually the question that I always ask myself, then who really is the problem, or what really is the problem with this fact of the idea that blacks keep on contesting the fact that they do not have their land yet, but yet there are many blacks in South Africa who still argue that the land is not the problem, what they want is an improved life. The problem is the problem the ANC, or where is this problem? Let's quickly listen to Prince Mashele as he breaks down these arguments in a very logical way, and I'll be back with a really interesting analysis by the BBC that actually argues that many whites in South Africa do not have a future, or do not see a future for white people in South Africa. Let's take a quick listen.
Prince, look, let me first and foremost say that I am black. Okay. Yeah, I think it's important because the point I'm going to make, I don't agree with what he's saying, even though he's also black. Okay. So we need to get this thing. The fact that we're all black doesn't mean that we agree on the same thing. So this thing called a black agenda.
But they say minimum progress. Yes, minimum.
No, this thing of a black agenda, by the way, is a thing that exists in his head. I don't buy it. That's number one.
Of course.
Number two. Number two.
Black sellouts.
That's fine.
So you represent.
I'll touch whatever.
All right. Give each other a chance. Yes.
So I don't agree with. By the way, this thing that he's talking about. Number one. Number two. You see, we have to remove emotions out of this discussion. If we don't remove emotions out of this discussion, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do exactly what people in Zimbabwe did. They have destroyed their country.
It is white people.
Let me finish.
Zimbabwe economy through economic sanctions.
Yeah.
You don't even know.
Thirdly,
All right.
Thirdly, you see, this idea that because white people stole land in 1913 and you go back, right?
Yeah.
You go back, right? So, if that's how we operate as a society, as a country, let me tell you, we're going to murder each other. Because even as black people, by the way, we killed each other before white people came here. It's true. It's historically true, by the way. We even took each other's land as black people, by the way. I've studied this history. So, Here is no,
This is your
not
mic
colonial, it's not
is
colonial history.
Colonial
Just-
history.
no, it's not true.
That's colonialism.
No, it's actually
King
history.
Shaka was a nation builder.
No, man.
He brought all those people.
Yeah, no.
King Shaka was a nation builder. He brought, the Zulu-speaking people now are the largest group because King Shaka brought these people together. He was building a nation. He was not a colonialist.
That's actually not true. I'm Shangan, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The person who is responsible for the establishment of my group was So Shangan Numalo, right? He ran away from King Shaka all the way to Mozambique. So this chap doesn't know what he's talking about. But anyway, let's come back to this. Solutions.
Yeah, solutions, please.
We've got to be scientific
Yeah.
and systematic in terms of addressing the land question.
Yeah.
Bottom line, we all agree that land must be redistributed. Number one, we must identify what group of black people need land for what purpose. Number one, right? Here's the thing. Why is it that Gauteng is the largest province in South Africa in terms of population? Why? Which is a small piece of land. It is because most of us as black people have actually left our provinces. I come from Mpumalanga, right? You come from the Northwest. Where do you come from? The Free State, right? Why did we leave all of those places where there is land and come here? And now we have overpopulated this small piece of population. It's because this gentleman does not want land where he comes from. He wants something else. That's why he's sitting here. You know, I once watched Robert Mugabe, by the way, being interviewed by Dali Tam, people of the South. It took Robert Mugabe to remind Dali Tam that he doesn't know what he's talking about with regard to his country. He said, your people in South Africa actually don't want land, they want jobs, which is why they moved to Gauteng, to Soweto. If you told the people of Soweto, land, let me tell you, most of them, by the way, don't want to farm. Even Afrikaners, your people, by the way, the majority of Africans are not farmers. The poor white problem. The majority of Afrikaners are actually urbanized, urban dwellers, right? Most South Africans want a better life, to live in a city and wear a suit like that. I don't want to farm.
So you
by the way, it's very hard.
give your
So, the solution is this. The solution, in closing, JJ, we must, see, characters like Andy, we must educate them. They are confusing our people. We must tell each other the truth.
Now, what is actually most interesting for me is the fact that some blacks actually in the thread made some really interesting comments that maybe to many black people also felt strange, and they were actually blasted also as well as sellouts and all that. So in other words, whenever there's an argument by a black speaking or questioning certain issues about land that, you know, speaks to the counter argument on black people needing to take their land back, they're usually called sellouts. That's something I've come to notice in social media. But anyway, there was this argument by this guy who said, in responding to Prince Mashele, he says he's telling the truth. Most people fail to even plant 10 heads of cabbages in their homes, even onions, carrots. In fact, most blacks have land. They don't know what to use it for. They don't want to use it for farming. So it's useless to take that land and give it to the people who don't know what to do about it. There was another interesting one as well, as I read earlier on in the start of this video. He actually said that, indeed, Prince, people just want land, not knowing what they are going to do with it. Some of them don't even have land, but they want land. But some of them don't even have land, but they want land. Why they not working for Julius Malema or Andile? Stupid people. There was another guy who actually made another really interesting comment. I think these are black people. He actually said, we call him whatever we want. The truth of the matter, we do not need land. We want better life. I am from Eastern Cape. There, plenty land. There, no one is utilizing that land. There was another also really interesting one also that says, Mashele is telling us the truth. It's not every one of us need land for agriculture. Some we just need it for housing in town, not even rural areas. There was another one also that says, but that is true. Andile Ntitama is confused and confusing people. He must go to Eastern Cape and stay there, plant vegetables, finish and clear. So these are kind of like the issues that actually come up in the comments that actually confuse me as an outsider trying to see this problem. It's a really touching debate, actually, really intense. I know it's raised a lot of heat, but I just found this really interesting report on the BBC that argues that do white people have a future in South Africa? All right, and I think this is a perspective coming from white people in South Africa who, although it seems that many people have argued that they own a large percentage of the land, many middle-class white South Africans argue that they do not see a future in South Africa. And I think it's really interesting and important for us to really understand how many white people see South Africa and how the blacks see South Africa in the context of this whole debate on land. So it said that apartheid South Africa looked after white people and nobody else, but now some of its white communities face a level of poverty, deprivation, or violence which threatens their future in South Africa. It says everyone here, regardless of color, tells you that white people are still riding high, that they run the economy, they have a disproportionate amount of influence in politics and in the media, and that they still have the best houses and most of them still have the best jobs in South Africa. So this argument says that this commentator here says that all of this is true, but it's not the only picture. It says, look below the surface and you will find poverty and a sense of growing vulnerability. So the question they came here to South Africa to ask was whether white people genuinely have a future in South Africa. So it says that the report goes on to say that working class white people, most of them Afrikaans speaking, are going through an intense crisis in South Africa. And by the way, I think this report on the BBC was made by, I think it's a British anyway, so John Simpson, all right? It argues that working class white people in South Africa, most of them Afrikaans speaking, are going through an intense crisis, but you will not read about it in the newspapers or see it reported on television because their plight seems to be something arising out of South Africa's old past, bad past, a past which everyone, black or white, would like to forget. It says, according to one leading political and activist, Mandla Nyakela, it says that this is the after effect of a huge degree of selfishness and brutality which was shown towards the black population under apartheid. He said that it is having its effect on whites today, even though they still own a share of South Africa's wealth, which is entirely disproportionate, according to this activist. Now, the report then goes on to say that this may all be true, but the people who are suffering are now the weakest and most vulnerable members of the white community. There's an Afrikaner campaigner here for AfriForum that actually, his name is Ernst Roth, right? He said that Ernst Roth then took this reporter to a white squatter camp. It has been set up on the property of a sympathetic white farmer and is called optimistically the Sunshine Corner. That's Songskun Hochski, right? It said that there are broken down cars and bits of discarded furniture everywhere. Beyond the wooden shacks lie ditches and pools of dirty, stagnant water where mosquitoes brew. 2 basic toilets served the whole camp. According to Ruts, these are 80 white squatter camps, many of them bigger than this in Pretoria area alone. Across South Africa as a whole, he believes there could be as many as 400,000 poor whites in conditions like this. Now, this particular squatter camp, Soskin Husky, has no water and no electricity. It says that the inhabitants live on 2 handout meals of maize porridge a day, which is provided by local volunteers. There is no social security for them, no lifeline, any more than there was for non-whites when apartheid ruled. This old bricklayer now says, I do not want to live in a place like this. His name was actually Franz de Jager. He was a former bricklayer. He said he was said to have a beard and a wrinkled face that looks like one of the old Voetrekkers. He said that he doesn't want to live like this, but he cannot get out. His wife died suddenly of cancer a few years ago, and it sent him to a downward spiral of binge drinking and destitution. Semi-skilled white people have little chance of getting a job in South Africa when so many black South Africans are also unemployed. So you see, it's a really complex thing. Many blacks are unemployed, but many semi-white South Africans also cannot get a job in South Africa. And I think this is one of the reasons that's actually also pushing many of South African, diaspora. I see a lot of white South Africans in the diaspora a lot commenting, many times on social media, white in Australia, white in Canada and all that. South Africans, actually, you see, and many of them had a hope when the GNU came to power that probably this might be time to come home and contribute to building the society. But anyway, it just speaks to the fact that South Africa is that so complex that as much as we argue that South Africa has a 33.3% unemployment rate, there are many semi-skilled white people who are unemployed in South Africa and many, many, many black people unemployed in South Africa. So it's a really complex situation of unemployment and, difficulties in South Africa across the races. So it says that there's another group of white Afrikaners far higher up the social scale who are deeply threatened, in this case, literally. It says virtually every week, the press in South Africa reports the murder of white farmers, though you will not hear much about it in the media outside South Africa. It says that in South Africa, you are twice as likely to be murdered if you are a white farmer than if you are a police officer. And the police in South Africa have a particularly dangerous life. I've mentioned that a lot on this channel. Being a police, being a lawyer, being this critical profession in South Africa is really tough. I really can already put myself in the shoes of these people. But it says that the killings of farmers are often particularly brutal. So in other words, it appears that South African farmers, especially the white farmers, actually feel that really intense anger that actually, according to this report, stems from the brutal history of apartheid and its impact on the black people. So the farmers that actually get hit a lot. But anyway, the report goes on then to say that Ernst Ruet's organization has published the names of more than 2,000 people who have died over the last 2 decades. The government has so far been unwilling to make solving and preventing these murders a priority. So that's 2,000 white people have died because of these attacks. But anyway, it says that he then went on to a little town called Geluik, Happiness. A few weeks ago, gunmen burst into a farm shop there and opened fire, killing one farmer outright and injuring one of his sons and a shop worker. They stole next to nothing. It seemed like a deliberate targeted killing. Soon afterwards, the son died of injuries. There was another daughter and a sister of one of the men who died. Her name was Belinda Van Noord. He said that she spoke about the dangerous lives that white people live in the countryside and that, the police has seemed to show little interest in their case. This reporter then goes on to say that in the little graveyard where her brother and her sister were buried, and also 2 other graves of farmers actually murdered recently, she argues that it was becoming a killing ground. So the final fact of this whole report, actually by the BBC here, I know it might feel like it's really compromised or somehow in a way, but it says that there used to be 60,000 white farmers in South Africa. In 20 years, that number halved, so they lost a lot of white farmers in South Africa. Now, it says in those old days, the apartheid system looked after whites and did very little for anyone else. Nowadays, white people in South Africa are on their own and they have to fight for their survival themselves. So as a result of this, many white people in South Africa do not see a future in South Africa. They do not see a future for themselves in South Africa. And this is coming in light of the fact that, there's still this large argument that 10% of, the wealth in South Africa is, 80 or 85% thereabout of the wealth in South Africa is controlled by 10% of the population. And this 10% of the population has been argued to be many white South Africans. So it's really tricky how these statistics, speak, and especially in light of the fact that Prince Mashele actually argues that, this whole issue of land and all that, he argues, especially if as you heard in the video with Andile Nkutama, he actually argues that, those proponents of white land expropriation and all that seem to be deceiving the people, according to Prince Mashele, and that what many black South Africans need actually is kind of like a good life, a good job. Like, as you could hear from his argument, he argued about how many blacks who in the townships, like I think Soweto and Mpumalanga and all that, come to cities like Gauteng to look for a job. You see, and these blacks probably do not need a land, according to his argument. But anyway, there's also another school of thought that actually argues that if many blacks in the Mpumalanga, in the townships also, are given land, that they'll be able to farm and produce for themselves what they could eat, and that in a way, farming in itself is a form of employment, self-employment as it were, and that they could be able to sustain themselves and reduce the unemployment rate in South Africa. So these are kind of like the two arguments that actually now striking the internet, especially in light of now the EFF's MPA conference that's coming up. And we know the major proposition of the EFF is land expropriation without compensation. But in light of the fact that many white South Africans themselves do not even put themselves in that position, they do not see themselves as part of that 10% that control the South African economy, and many of them fleeing abroad, that they do not see the future, that their own future in South Africa. And then blacks also as well, the black majority arguing that the job situation and the life difficulties in them trying to get back their land and all that. So these are two arguments that really makes this whole land question in South Africa tricky. For me, I'm Nigerian, and under colonization in Nigeria, we really didn't have this kind of problem of the disenfranchisement of land. The colonization in Nigeria actually was kind of like, it began with the British bombardment of Lagos in I think somewhere around the 1850s thereabout, and the British then working with indirect rule. So the British ruled through the established kings and emirs in Nigeria, but then as they kind of like exited Nigeria at the entrance of independence by the Nigerian state, many papers argued that power was then deposited in the hand of one particular tribe, and that tribe now seemed to have been the tribe that has been dominating the political power for many years. And so this is the character of post-colonialism in Nigeria. But in South Africa, it is a character that's still fixated on land, and that's why the whole land question still remains a really big question. How the ANC should have, I don't know really how the ANC treated this whole issue, that it has lingered on, and it's really boiling, in the hearts of whites, in the hearts of blacks, and some blacks are even beginning to rethink that probably this land issue is not something we need. Probably they do not need the land. What they really need is a better way of living, a better source of living. While some argue that if they own that land, they might be able to control their own, way of living and have it better for themselves. So it's a really tricky argument. But let's continue the argument in the comments. Let's discuss. Let's have a robust discussion about this. What do you guys think about this whole issue with land expropriation and land in South Africa and the future of white people in South Africa? Share your thoughts in the comments.